Okay, what's up, guys? It's a beautiful autumn afternoon, and I hope everybody is safe and well. I want to talk about Tupac Shakur, and I want to say some things about him because, unlike a lot of you who probably listen to him, I'm addressing my younger audience here. I remember Tupac. I remember when he died. I remember when he was killed. I remember when Biggie was killed. Hip hop back then was, I don't know if it was different back then, but I think that people like him really contributed to the art form that it is now. And a lot of these hip-hop artists that are in place now owe them a lot of gratitude, sort of like what the Beatles did for rock and roll. I'm not one to compare apples and oranges here, but you get my meaning. Tupac, in my view, was probably one of the greatest lyricists. There's no doubt in my mind, had he lived, it'd probably go down as probably the greatest hip-hop artist of all time. A lot of people do believe that he's the greatest hip-hop artist. I'm not in a position to demonstrate the contention either way. I am not a hip-hop scholar, so I don't know. There was a time, and some of you may not remember this, but there was a time when records came with warning labels on them. This was really big in the 80s. They used to have records that said, explicit lyrics, watch what you say, watch what you're listening to. We don't want you to get a wrong idea. And not all art forms of music, not all genres had an issue with this. But one form of music that I liked very much and still do did have an issue, and they were the poster child for this, and it was heavy metal. Heavy metal used to start coming with warning labels because angry parents got mad at the messages that heavy metal was conveying. Devil worship and violence, drug use. And I'm thinking to myself, those were popular things. You had the Night Stalker back then, Rich Ramirez in Los Angeles killing people, drawing 666 and pentagrams on his palm of his hand. Do you remember all them photos? Well, for those of you who are younger, Google the Night Stalker and you'll see what I'm talking about. But so that was very popular, and it was very unpopular for a lot of people. And consequently, these labels got put out on these types of music and records. So the heavy metal community took a lot for that. And what's even more astonishing is, heavy metal never gained the audience that hip-hop has. It just never happened. Now, there were other forms of music out there that were even much worse than heavy metal. One of them was punk. And you could listen to old punk bands from the 80s, and they swear so much on their... But, most of the parents back then didn't know what punk was. They didn't have a very good knowledge. They didn't even have a working knowledge of it. It was just heavy metal. Because heavy metal did have an audience. It was popular, but it was never as popular as Michael Jackson or Prince. They did not have a rival in heavy metal at all. There was one guy that did, though. Ozzy Osbourne got into a lot of heat over his song Suicide Solution, where a teenager killed himself over the song. You guys remember that? You remember when that happened? Well, that was big stuff back in the 80s. Ozzy took a lot of heat over that. Probably cost him a lot of money, too. So it brings me to hip-hop, okay? Moving from 1985 to 2023 here. Hip-hop is a very bad form of music, and this is where people are going to now, this is the part of the video where you guys are going to get mad at me, and people are going to take umbrage, and I understand why, that you go well and do that. But in my mind, I think we're burying that under the carpet, because it's just that, it's hip-hop. When you look at people like Tupac, Biggie, Nipsey Hussle, and all these guys that died, why did they die? Tupac was a brilliant artist. He was a fantastic writer, but he had a very dark side to him. And that dark side of his life ended up ending his life. He was a gangster. He was a thug. He was a hustler. And he was a gang member. He was a member of the Bloods. Biggie was wrapped up in dark, clandestine secrets with people. You may not be able to say that for Nipsey Hussle, but there just seems to be this connection where these guys are around gangs. They're in hip-hop, they're making millions of dollars, but they're still affiliated with crime. I don't know of a genre of music where you can say that's the case too. Can you name me another genre of music where that's the case other than hip-hop? And I'm just wondering why that is, and I'm also wondering why that's not a concern for parents. that are listening to this, we've embraced the ghetto culture. We've put the ghetto culture on a level where it shouldn't be. There's nothing, trust me, I lived in the streets of Pittsburgh, and I can tell you, there's nothing extravagant about the ghetto culture. And these kids that are wrapped up in this and are looking up to people like Tupac and whatever famous hip-hop artists that you can name right now, especially ones right now that are very relevant to this generation, they look at them and they look at the money, they look at the women, but they don't realize that there's a lot more to it going on. And see, this is where I'm disturbed with hip-hop, because nobody seems to blink an eye for this, and I think the reason why it's because it's black. And we're giving the black people a pass to say, you know what, that's just part of their community and that's how they are. But a white person does that, and then it's exploited and it's all over the place. You know, you can make the same argument with grunge, okay? And I remember when that happened. I remember when Kurt Cobain died. I remember, you know, it exploited, you know, drug use and mental illness. That's not quite the same thing, though, guys. I don't remember a song where Kurt Cobain is telling people to go out and kill somebody or hustle or gangbang. I can't say the same for the Beatles. I can see the elements of drug use that influence their creativity, but I don't see it on the levels to where that's affecting communities like hip-hop does, and where people actually get killed because of the lifestyles and the people that they're affiliated with. Why does that exist in hip-hop and it doesn't exist anywhere else? Because I'm asking this question because that's why Tupac's dead. He was involved with people that he shouldn't have been involved with. He wasn't able to leave that lifestyle behind, irrespective of the beautiful reputation that he accrued for himself flawlessly and very hard-workingly. He wasn't able to remove that part of his life. Biggie wasn't able to remove that part of his life. There are countless rappers in the graves right now because of gangbanging. Nobody blinks an eye. Nobody says anything about it. No white journalist out there writes articles in the New York Times of why the black community needs to eradicate this. Why do I have to say it? Why does a white person have to say that? And you can't say that, you know, it's white people that are doing this. There's not white people living in black communities where they're engaging in this kind of behavior. It's in the black community. There's lots of black people want to move in white communities, but you don't see a lot of white people moving into black communities. And I know that sounds racist, but there's sociological and economic reasons for things that I just said. Am I right? I mean, really, come on. Be realistic about this. Be brutally realistic about it. I'm not saying hip-hop's a derogatory form of music, and it's lower than, you know, heavy metal or pop or classical music. I'm not saying that. But just take a look at the flavor that it has. Think of all the things that have just happened recently in the past 2-3 years, how many our cities have been ravaged by hoodlums. Ever since Black Lives Matter took the platform that they did, and I'm not blaming Black Lives Matter exclusively, but they certainly contributed. Look at all of these cities that have been ravaged by hoodlums and gangbangers, drug dealers, gangsters. You think those guys, you think them ladies and gentlemen are listening to Tchaikovsky and Beethoven? I don't think so. You think they're listening to Nirvana? I don't think so. You think they're listening to the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Michael Jackson? I don't think so. You get where I'm going with this, right? Surely you can understand the contention that I'm demonstrating here in this video. That this is bad. This is something I am saying that this needs to be eradicated from hip-hop. I think that there is a lot of good hip-hop artists out there that can rap and take the mic and go onto the stage and do their thing, and they don't have to talk about murder and thugging and gangbanging. And I think there's a lot of artists that really did that. How about Ice Cube? Ice Cube was never involved in it. He grew up around it, but he was never a gangster. Not every hip-hop artist is a gangster. I'm well aware of that. I'm just using this as an example. I think it's important that we understand where this music's coming from, who's behind it, who's affiliating it, and who's advertising it, and who's sponsoring it, because I think it's all tied to a lot of darkness and out there, a lot of darkness and evil out there, and these people are losing their lives. Tupac would have never been smoked, if you will, at that red light that night, you know, had he not been around the people that he was affiliating with. See, this is what I'm saying. You know, there's a huge sleight of hand going on. They take a huge gamble, and quite frankly, they've lost. You could say the same for drug and alcohol abuse. Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, all those people. Okay, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse. There's lots of examples in rock music where people have died from drug and alcohol abuse. No questions about it. But I don't think that you can find examples in their music where they're advocating for people to have the same lifestyle that they did. But in hip-hop, I see that. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you won't agree with me. But I think that that is an element in hip-hop that really needs to be discussed. It needs to be brought out into the open, and something needs to be done about that. I don't think that there should be a glory over this, and I see it in the young cultures with young kids here. They glorify the ghetto. And as I said, I don't know how many times I need to say it in a video, there's nothing to glorify about the ghetto. Trust me. I lived there. I've seen what goes on in the streets, and I still have seen things that I won't make videos about, and I won't tell you about. That's how bad it was. So these kids, everybody's, they're big, strong kids that play football. They're athletic. They have the strength, overgrown men. But when they commit a crime of something stupid, then they're babies. We live in a culture where, young kids they're still considered children and babies. That's another thing that's really ran our society and our young people weak. They're not babies. They are responsible for their actions. They have the strength of 2 grown men, some of them. They know what they're doing. They need to be held accountable. In ancient Jewish law, you were, at the age of 13, you were considered a man. Our society has really watered that down. Everybody's a baby, when they do, especially when they do something wrong and they commit a crime. And what kind of music when you find out what they're listening to. And again, this argument goes back. It's reflective. Oh, look, he was listening to heavy metal. Now he was a devil worshiper and he went out and killed babies. But when they do that in hip-hop, nobody seems to blink an eye about it. That's what I'm trying to convey here. Let's explore what kids are listening to. Let's be cautious. And let's not end up like Tupac did. Or Biggie.